Okay, I met some of you before. Several of you have come a couple of weeks ago for the Key Wellness Day, where we introduced the concept of Qi. And it just come to me just now that even before the Chinese and the Koreans talked about Qi and Qi, the Egyptians had the word Fi. And from that comes Qi and Qi. And this, for the Egyptians, which is probably one of the oldest civilizations, they already knew that there was this life force, this eternal life force that creates all life. But what we are going to be talking about here today is the whole concept of family healing or ancestral healing, which is not a very easy concept to grasp. I don't think there is anything more difficult than to understand what life is and if there is a continuation of life. It is all there is, just this physical material life, or does life continue in another form? So there are two ways I think we already have our preconceived ideas. Yes, I believe there is another life, life continues. No, I don't believe it. I believe life ends here in this material world. And of course we can see that science falls into this camp. They believe that life ends with this material world. And the more spiritually or religiously inclined people believe that no, life continues on. So I think the assumption we have to make here is that life does continue on. Otherwise, there is no point in even having this conversation. But that is not to say that we cannot use so many of the concepts from science that can help us to understand, does life continue on? What form does it continue on? Well, I think we've got to start thinking about how the universe was created with the Big Bang. So essentially, we do know that all matter comes from light. That original light, the original light that created the universe, that original light is in us. It is in us. Light is eternal. Light never disappears. Neither does energy. And neither does atoms. Atoms are eternal. You cannot destroy an atom. This body, this physical body, essentially is made of atoms. When you look at an atom, there is no matter in it. It's just energy. There's a tiny, tiny minuscule of matter, which does not explain how we can have such solid material world from that tiny, minuscule little point of matter, which is just in the nucleus. The rest is just energy. And one thing we do know is that this comes from, they call the first law of thermodynamics. Energy can never be created nor destroyed. I beg your pardon? Okay. Can you, here's the technician, he has to increase the volume. Can you ask?
It's not possible.
Oh, I see. Okay. I'm going to have to, okay, I'll speak up. So essentially, the material world is made of atoms, and one of the greatest mysteries in science is that we don't know how energy becomes matter, or essentially how light becomes matter, but we do know it does. To dispute that would be to dispute the theory of the Big Bang. So we do know that light becomes matter, and this light is eternal. This light never disappears. This light is in us. It's the most fundamental element of the material world is light and sound. Frequency, vibration. So if we assume that from the first law of thermodynamics, and they say energy can never be created nor destroyed, And if we assume that we are essentially energy, then we know that this energy will continue on in some form. In what form? The other very important law of physics says information can never be lost or information can never be destroyed. What I mean by information is the very code of life, and I'm not talking about the DNA here, no. This information exists in a quantum domain, in a quantum world. Now, for instance, the information to make this flower can never disappear, because if it did, we could never have these flowers again. The information to make a human being can never disappear, because if it did, no more babies would be born. So essentially, to break these two most fundamental laws of science, energy can never be created nor destroyed. Information can never be lost or destroyed. Essentially what we are saying here is that life is eternal. Otherwise, you'd be contradicting these two most fundamental laws in science. But the interesting thing is, like, even before the Big Bang, now cosmologists believe that something already existed even before the Big Bang. And that's when I talk about this quantum reality, which is the information that is held at this quantum reality to create a universe. That information already exists. Therefore, what they believe in now more and more is that there have been hundreds, millions, zillions of Big Bangs. This universe we are living in now is just one of zillions of universes. Because the information that creates life can never, ever be destroyed. So even at that moment of the Big Bang, you already have the information to make the stars, to make the planets, to make all the living beings, and us. So the point I'm trying to drive here is this: life is eternal. Energy is eternal. And light is eternal. But what is this light? That is what we believe is the spirit. Bodies, we know what they are. We can know her bodies, we can touch it, we can feel it. This is matter, this is solid matter. Even though all the atoms in this body pretty much are just empty space. So essentially what happens is this: why do things manifest in such a solid state? Well, this place here is full of atoms, but we can't see it. And yet you can see this. How come? Essentially, these atoms here, they're in their free state. Lucky buggers. They're kind of moving around quite happily, zooming around very, very fast, because they are just atoms: oxygen, nitrogen, hydrogen, carbon. So you've got all these atoms that are moving so fast that the eye cannot see. Whereas here, the atoms have clumped together in molecules. So it's like atoms are holding hands. So you got this hydrogen atom that holds hand with the nitrogen atom, which holds hand with the carbon atom. And as they're holding hands, what's happening? They're slowing down the frequency. So the really heavy atoms are slowing down the really fast ones. So for instance, you've got oxygen, which is a very light element, which is vibrating so fast, but then that joins with iron or potassium, which is really heavy. It slows it down, slows it down, it slows it down. It's like, imagine yourself, you go for a run by yourself, and you can run very, very fast. Then you ask a friend to come and run with you, but not just side by side, but holding hands. If he's slower than you, he's going to slow you down. Now imagine if you get 100 friends together, all running together, holding hands. The slowest ones, the heaviest ones, are going to slow everybody down. That is how you end up with this stuff that you can see. It's the same stuff that's here, but because they are all clumped together in molecules, which slow down the frequency so much, that is why you can see. Now, when it comes to the spirit, wow, what is that? So again, let's think of something like water. Water exists in 3 states. In fact, we do know we live in a 3-dimensional world. Everything comes in 3s. Space, height, width, and length. Depth, sorry. Time, past, present, and future. We can see we are living this 3-dimensional world. Now we have 3D movies. So you can see we are living this 3-dimensional world. Everything really comes for some reason. Probably there are other universes which is not 3-dimensional, but this universe we are living in is. So essentially, you've got a solid state, the liquid state, and a gaseous state. It's the same stuff. Same stuff. But here, if I change the temperature, I'm going to have that. If I increase the temperature, I have that. If I increase the temperature even more and pressure, of course, all the right conditions, then I'm going to have that one. Now, it's exactly the same stuff. Exists in 3 different phases, depending on temperature, pressure, and all kinds of conditions. Now, it's not too far off to think of this as in the body. This is a very interesting one. I'm not sure if I'm going to have the time to explain this one, but so essentially what we are seeing here, this is pretty solid. This is pretty solid stuff. That's the body. Now, to equate the mind with the liquid state is so interesting because essentially that is how the mind should be. Not necessarily how it is for a lot of people, but how it should be. What's the liquid state? Look at this. What happens if I pour this on this table? It's just going to run. Nothing can stop it. It's fluid. It's mobile. It's soft. It's just like, and it adapts itself to whatever container you put it in. You put in a round vessel, it becomes round. You put in a square vessel, it becomes square. That is how essentially the human mind is. It has to be adaptable. It has to be flexible. It's got to be fluid, and it's got to be moving. But guess what happens when you say, I want this, I don't want that. I like this, I don't like that. This is right, this is wrong. The mind is becoming more and more solid. More and more solid, and it's taking a shape. This is what I am, this is what I believe. So the mind is actually solidifying, the mind is becoming more like that state. What happens if this mind is eternal? We're going to get that in a minute. Now this one, this of course is the interesting one. The gaseous state, you cannot see. Like all this gas, all these molecules here, all this gas that's in this room, we cannot see. But because we cannot see, can you say it doesn't exist? No. All these atoms that are flowing right here, this very moment that we cannot see, they exist. So what happens is, I can melt this. I can melt this and turn into a liquid state. I can increase the temperature even more and turn into gas. But you know what this one? This one is eternal. These 2 states disappear. Anything I do to these 2 states disappear. But the atoms, the hydrogen and the oxygen atoms that make up the gaseous state never, ever disappear. In fact, the same oxygen atoms that we are breathing at this very moment were the oxygen atoms that the Romans were breathing 2,000 years ago, or a Tibetan monk was breathing 5,000 years ago. No new atoms have been created since the Big Bang. It's the same atoms. Atoms are eternal. If this body is made of atoms, I am eternal. But in what form? Now, we're not going to talk about these 2. We're going to be talking about this one. Oh, this is not very good. In order to understand what a word means, the best way to find out is to look at the root of the word. The root of the word tells you exactly what it means. Usage changes the meaning. We use words in very different ways, and as time goes by, we are getting further and further and further away from the root of the word that means exactly what it means. The word spirit, amazing enough, comes from the Latin spiritus, which means breath. In the Hebrew language, we have the word ruach, which means both spirit and breath. In Greek, we have the word pneuma, which means both spirit and breath. And in Arabic, likewise, we have another word which means spirit, means breath. So why every language, especially the most ancient languages, have said that? I think the reason being, as we come into this world, the very first thing we do, we take our first breath. As we leave this world, the last thing we do, we take our last breath. The only thing that's constant throughout our lives, from the time we are born until the time we die, is the breath. Everything else has changed. Our bodies are changing. And in fact, they say every 7 years you have a whole new body. All the cells in your body have changed, the hormones have changed, the hair's gone gray, you know, I'm shrinking. Everything is changing. Everything is changing. The only thing that's constant, that never changes, is that. Therefore, what is animating life? What really is animating life? What really is keeping us alive? It's not the brain, it's not even the heart, it's the breath. When you cannot breathe anymore, you die. So is there then a possibility that this is what's keeping us alive? Not this body, not this mind, but this. But the interesting thing is also is that all the ancient people, there's a great documentary came out several years ago actually in the BBC called Light Fantastic. It was really, really good because he went through the whole history of light and how in ancient times light was always associated with the spirit. So essentially what he is saying is that this is light. And this light, as we talked about before, is eternal. Light never ever disappears. Now, the reason we are here today is, this is all the scientific stuff, which doesn't really matter that much. The reason we are here today is, when we are born, when we are conceived by a father and a mother. Our father and mother were conceived by their parents, who in turn were conceived by their parents, and their parents, and their parents. Now, if you take the information I have given you so far, especially this one, that information can never be lost, if we inherit that information from the lives of our parents and grandparents and great-grandparents, what kind of information are we carrying? Is it a good one? A neutral one? Not a so good one? We actually have a mixture. Some of our ancestors could have had great lives, some others not so. And we are carrying all that information. It's in us. So you can think in terms of DNA, but DNA, one of the interesting things that, another thing that's come out in this last, certainly this last 10 years, is the science of epigenetics. You're all familiar with epigenetics. Epigenetics, it's mind-boggling. It's turning genetics on its head. It's a completely different way of looking at life and human beings and us and so on. The word epigenetics the word epi means above. So these above genetics. And what you're finding is that, well, okay, let's start like this. With classical genetics, they believe that we are born with all the genes we're going to have for the rest of our lives. These genes are locked inside the cells, and they never change. So if you're born with a gene that causes a particular disease, well, bad luck, because that gene can never be changed. Epigenetics is totally changing, turning that on its head. What epigenetics has discovered more and more is that genes are being constantly changed, at least being turned on and off according to what we are doing. And most of all, according to what we are thinking and what we are feeling. We are changing the way genes are being expressed. And once you change those genes, that's passed on to the next generations. So they found even things like negative thinking, very intense negative thinking, shrinks the DNA. The DNA actually coils really tightly. And that's not a good idea. And with a lot of positive thing, feelings of love and compassion, DNA spreads out, and it actually gives out biophotons, which are particles of light. So what they are finding more and more, that throughout our lives, we're actually changing our whole genetic makeup. So imagine one of your ancestors, and mostly with environmental and emotional stuff. We are changing the way genes are expressing themselves. So imagine you're one of your ancestors who was subjected to a lot of traumatic experiences. Well, my grandfather was in the First World War. I don't think you need to say any more than that. Now, you imagine that as they were subjected to intense stress or trauma, that would have changed the gene, the way the gene is expressed itself. And then you come out 2 or 3 generations or even 4 generations later, and you have got that gene that was changed way back there. I'm carrying a cancer gene that killed everybody in my family. I was given an 85 to 9% chance of dying from the illness around the age of 40, mid-40s, which is where everybody in my family died. I'm 60, I'm still here. And I think the science of epigenetics is proving that. You can change a gene. But what you have to do to change that gene, well, they haven't got there yet. They haven't got the method. They don't know the way. They can tell you to do things like meditation, positive thinking. Of course, all these things are very beneficial. But if you're carrying a really heavy family history, and over 20 years I've been doing this work, I have seen all kinds of things. When people are carrying a really, really heavy family history, their lives are not easy. So what's the method to change it? There's a very big difference between observing things in a scientific environment and actually knowing what to do about it. Especially the science of epigenetics, they'll probably get there, but it's an infant. They're right at the beginning. But one of the interesting things that they are finding also is that the mind, and there's an evolutionary reason for that, the mind tends to hold on to negative experiences much more than it holds on to positive experiences. And they cannot understand why. So what they believe is that the brain, they can't use brain, mind, can't interchangeably. They believe the brain has got a bias towards negativity, but they can't, What they believe, and this is according to the latest research being done on brain physiology, there is evolutionary reason for that. If you see yourself as a hunter-gatherer, and you go out and you pick up some berries, and you go out gathering and hunting, and you find a nice bunch of fruit, berries, whatever, roots, whatever, and you take it home, great, you feed the kids. And you don't think about it anymore. But if you were food for a predator, if you've got a predator running after you, and your life is in danger, that is what you're going to remember, not the nice food that you picked up and took to the kids. Because there is fear and there is injury involved. So imagine if one of these predators took a big bite at you. Next time you go hunting, you're not going to remember the nice bunch of fruit that you picked up. You're going to remember the predator that took a bite at you. That is what your brain is going to remember. For protection, for safety, for protection, your brain is biased towards that. Your mind is going to retain negative experiences because you need to remember it for your own protection. And there is the fear, and there is you have to remember it. Otherwise, it's going to happen again if you forget. And what they are finding is that these negative experiences are actually changing the brain structure in such a way that is being passed on to the next generations. Very strong negative experiences. So our ancestors, they've got a mixture. We've got a mixture of ancestors who have had a great life, who have had great experiences, and you have those who are carrying very painful, very traumatic experiences. Therefore, whatever work you're trying to do on yourself, you do all the meditation, you eat all the right foods, you exercise, you do everything right, and yet you feel your life is still not quite working out. You're still carrying stuff that you can't figure out. I don't know about you, but as a 5-year-old, I already knew I was carrying stuff that was not mine. I didn't know what happened. I didn't know anything, but there was this feeling of, there was this heaviness. I was a very, very unhappy child. I had depression as a child, very serious depression. And it was only when I was in my 40s that I had to do this genetic test that I found out I'm carrying this gene, which is coming down for both sides of my family because I was born in Madeira, a tiny little island. You know what happens in tiny little islands? A lot of intermarriage. So my family, way back there, was the same family. In fact, they have the same surname. My mother's maiden name, my father's maiden name is the same family. And they go, no, you're not related. You're not related. I mean, well, they knew they were. Anyway, so somebody way back there has mutated this gene, which was the same family, has been coming down all the way. But you know, when you look at the science of, what do they call it? There's a name. Oh, the people who study populations and. It doesn't matter. So essentially, there's these people who study.
Cosmology?
No, it's like.
Genealogy?
Yeah, kind of. There's actually a special science. They have a special name for it. So they study like where we are coming from. They can trace it back to the mitochondria. They can trace us back, way back. And what they found, we all originate from the same person. You know, they call her Eve, who lived around 200,000, 300,000 years ago in Africa. And
how did she conceive?
Oh, the scientists named her Eve just to be funny, you know, kind of. That's, you know, scientists do have a sense of humor sometimes, you know. Their sense of humor, you know, like they call Dolly the ship, you know, like they make this clown and they call it Dolly the ship, you know, just to make a little bit of fun. And so they named her Eve because essentially what they are saying is like she was the primordial mother. And we all descend from her. And in fact, these people who studied this population growth, you know, they found that most of us also descend from King David. You know, the whole thing is actually extraordinary, that essentially we all have a common ancestor. We all share this common history, we all share a common ancestor, and essentially we are all one. But our families over thousands of years got separated, migration, this family went over there, this family went over there, this family went over there. So now we all look like separate populations. But when you start studying all the way back, you realize that we all come from one common ancestor. We all share the same history. We all share the same traits. We all share the same experiences. Now, what to do about it? So say if you're carrying a very heavy family history, what can be done about it? Well, this is why the concept of ki is so important, and is not something that is not common knowledge. You know, you talk about ki or you talk about chi, most people are going to go, yeah, I heard of it, but so what? What is it? I'll define ki as the original information. It's the primary source of life. It's the stuff that made us at conception. When father and mother come together, it's actually for those who didn't come here for the Ki Wellness. I also describe Ki as the union of the negative and the positive polarity. This being mother, this being father. When the negative and the positive polarity come together, it makes Ki. And this Ki is the original light. Is the original light. This essentially is a spark. What happens when you get positive and negative together? You get a spark. That spark, you know what that spark is? Is your energy system. It's just your energy system. At that point of conception, you're just light, you're just energy. And your energy system is formed at that very moment of conception, which is a mini Big Bang. You know what we are? We are walking mini Big Bangs. We are exactly the same. It's exactly the same process that created the universe, creates human conception, or any conception for that matter. So at that very moment, light holds all the information of life. And this is what the ancient people knew. Light is not only what creates life, but also what holds all the information. So at that very moment of conception, they inherit that information coming down from father's family, mother's family, going back several generations. Therefore, what survives the death of the physical body is not this matter. We know this matter disappears. But this energy, this information, never disappears. It's your energy system. Your energy system is eternal. And your energy system holds the information of that life. When you leave this world, you're not going to have a physical body anymore, but your energy system exists in the form of Ki. And that information is passed on to the next generations. Well, what do we do about it? Well, with this original information, we can change the information that has gone wrong, irrespective of what it is that has happened to them. You can change that because with energy is not solid. Once energy solidifies as matter, it's very hard to change matter. That's the limitation of medical science. They are trying to change matter. That is very difficult. You can eliminate the symptoms. Yes, you can do that. But to actually change the cause of the illness, what has caused that illness? To change the cause of the illness, as we all know, is not the same as the eradication of symptoms. So if you hold the information of that illness, and if that information is held in your energy system, and you create a new life, that information is going to be passed on to the next generation. And of course, we have inherited that from our previous generation. So Ki, the whole concept of Ki, what is so extraordinary about Ki, this original life force, this original energy, is that it does not differentiate between body, mind, and spirit. Whatever it is, whatever problem is happening in a person's body, or mind, or spirit, Ki can change because it's the original information. And we do that primarily with sound and light. But then again, this is going to much greater detail, which I cannot cover here today. For those who want to pursue it further about the family healing, who really wants to know what's involved, we're going to have a one-to-one consultation. And if you can't do it today, you can make a booking, come another time. Then we can explain in much more detail. But essentially what's happening is, if you remember that with the Big Bang, the original, the most fundamental elements of life are light and sound. With light and sound, you can actually change matter. But they have to be the right frequencies. They have to be the right sound vibration. In fact, the Russian scientists, they have changed frog embryos into salamander embryos just by sending certain frequencies to the DNA. They actually changed the DNA just with light frequencies. They're using laser, just with light frequencies. And they've done a lot of that with sound frequencies as well. They are changing DNA without touching it, no cutting, no transferring DNA to the other life form. No, just certain light and sound frequencies. They are changing the DNA. So we can actually change that information that we are holding in our energy system with Ki. Over the years, I've been doing this work for about 20 years now, and I have seen the most extraordinary things happening to people once they do the family healing. To tell you the truth, I don't really understand how it works. To me, the whole thing is a mystery. When you're talking about what Ki is, I don't really know. I can describe it as, well, Ki is, you've got a negative, but that's only a description. What actually is, I don't know. But when you see the changes that have happened to people after doing this family healing, I'm going to give you 2 examples. But don't take this as gospel. I have seen all kinds of variations. I have seen extraordinary things happening. I have seen these things happening. I have seen those things that didn't happen. For me, anything can happen. But these 2 particular cases are the ones that have stuck to my mind because they were so dramatic. One was when I was working in Australia. This guy who was bipolar, severely bipolar. In fact, it was extraordinary what happened to him. He was a very, very successful businessman, running 2 businesses 24/7. And then he had this horrific psychotic episode, and he went quite psychotic. And he was taken to a psychiatric hospital. He was in hospital a very long time. He came out diagnosed as being bipolar. Pretty much lost his business, lost everything. In and out of psychiatric hospitals, attempted suicide a couple of times. And at some point, how things are meant to happen, he found out about us. In fact, was his little kid, his little son, picked up one of our flyers and for some incredible, strange reason ran to the father and said, "Look, Dad, this is for you." And it was a flyer from one of our centers in Melbourne. And so this guy came to us, and he started treatment. Yeah, treatment helped a little bit because he had such massive energy blockages in his body. So he started the treatment, and then he started the training, the key classes. Yeah, you could see there's a progression. He was getting result, but we knew that he wasn't going to get healed, or he wasn't going to get very far with just the treatment and training. So at some point, I spoke to him about the family healing. Straight away, he recognized it because his grandmother was bipolar, and she committed suicide. So straight away, he recognized what I was talking about. But he couldn't convince his wife. The wife was totally against it. She said, "I don't believe it. We don't have the money. We can't do it." But he said, "No, I have to do this." And he did it. And I can't remember, I would say no more than 4 weeks after he finished the family healing, the change in him was so extraordinary. Like, I couldn't actually be near him for very long. His energy was so uncomfortable, really uncomfortable. I'm very sensitive to spirit energy, extremely sensitive. So I couldn't be near him very long. For the first time, after about 4 weeks, I could sit down, talk to him eye to eye. But the change in him was so extraordinary that his doctor immediately started to realize what had happened to him and start cutting down his medication. At the end of 12 months, he was completely off the medication, was completely normal, got at least on his business back. And then I went to the United States, I went to work in America, and I lost touch with him. But the last thing I had heard from him was that he was doing extremely well. He sent me an email saying, unfortunately, I didn't like just one thing he said, was like, he gave me the impression that he was back to the 24/7 style that broke him in the first place. Now we're talking about something different here. We're talking about a person's mind and a person's character. That history that he has inherited that was causing that problem, that was solved. But his character, his mind, that's his business for him to work on. The family healing doesn't do that. Now, but even then, as far as I know, last thing I heard from, in fact, my son is still in touch with him. My son said he's doing extremely well. The second case that I want to talk to you about, just as dramatic, but just to give you an idea, the variety, the diversity of people's experiences. Again, when I was working in Melbourne, 4 girls joined training at the same time, all in their mid-20s, all with chronic fatigue syndrome, which I thought was interesting. I never had anything like that happening. The worst one actually she didn't join training. She was so sick, she could not leave her house. She had been in her house for more than 2 years. If she even put her face outside the window, she would faint. So I used to go to her house 3 times a week just to give her treatment. But again, I knew the treatment was not going to help her to the extent that, I mean, that girl, I've never ever come across anything like it. I knew she was dying. I knew she wasn't going to live for very long. So I had to speak to the parents. And there I am, sitting in front of the parents. I'm just this person who comes in a couple of times a week to give the daughter treatment. They didn't know anything about me. They didn't know what I did. They saw me as a body therapist, like I was there giving her a massage. That's how they saw me. And there I am, sitting with the parents, trying to explain about the whole concept of family healing, the whole concept of energy, spirit, information, all this kind of stuff. Well, it so happened that the father was a scientist, just my luck, because he didn't believe a word that I said, of course. But he was a real traditional scientist. So when I left her house, I had this feeling that I was never going to see them again. That was the last time I was ever going to go to her house, because the father was so totally closed about it. So guess my surprise when a few days later I get a call from him. And he said, I didn't believe a word that you said. I still don't believe it. But I'll do anything for my daughter. And he actually said, I know she's dying. And he had already gone to America, he had gone to China, he had taken, when she was a little bit better anyway, that she could travel, he had taken her to so many different places. And he said, nothing has helped her. If this thing that you're talking about is going to help her, I'll do it, even though I do not believe it. But then he said, how are we going to do this? Because it's got to be done in our centers. It's a whole special ceremony. It's not treatments, it's a ceremony. It's a whole special thing that needs to be done in the center. So he said, she can't go there. I said, no problem. Her brother will come. Then he was thrown off. The brother's healthy. There's nothing wrong with the brother. It's her. She's the one who is sick. I said, doesn't matter. We need one person from the family. One person. It's the same information. Everybody in that family is carrying the same. I even said to him, when you could come it. He said, no way. So we need one person from that family. It's a family tree. This is a family tree. You've got you here. And you've got your parents, your grandparents, your brothers, your sisters. We're all connected. We just need one person from that family. It doesn't matter who it is. And this energy flows through all the living descendants. This I'm going to cover in a minute. I need to finish soon. As well as going back 4 generations. So the family healing covers 4 generations of ancestors. There is a reason why it's 4 generations, but I have to leave that for now. All the living descendants and future generations. So what the family healing is doing is bridging past, present, and future. Why? Because time does not exist. The whole concept of time is an illusion. In fact, it comes from Einstein. Einstein said the distinction between past, present, and future is a stubbornly persistent illusion. There is no such thing. The present is the link between past and future. In the present, we can change past, we can change future. That is the greatest blessing of being alive at this point in time. Because once you're not alive anymore, once you're living outside time and space, you cannot change anything anymore. This is a very interesting concept. Again, it's probably going to take me a long time to explain it. Material things exist within time and space. Look, I'm occupying this space. You cannot come here and take this space. And this time, whatever it is, today, 10 past 12, you're never going to live this time again. 12 July 2014, 12 past. So time and space, that's why Einstein didn't distinguish between time. Time is called space-time. Space-time. Things exist within space-time, but only for material things. Once you don't have a material body anymore, you're outside time and space, no more change can happen. If I choose to move my body from here to here, I have made that change. Once I don't have this body anymore, I cannot make that change anymore. And then again, it is a whole host of research that has been done in this area. So essentially what I'm trying to tell you is this. Right at this point in time, live in the present, we can change that history. We can change that past. We can change the future. Now, going back to the girl's story. So the brother came and did the whole ancestral healing thing, and they did many families, because with ancestral healing, which is we're going to explain to you later, many different families. You got father's family, you got mother's family, you got mother's family, many different families. And the more families you can cover, of course, there's a cost, and the cost can be significant, depending on how many families you do. The more families that you do, the more you're going to be covering, especially in my case, because of this cancer gene, I had to do lots and lots of families to cover the whole lot. And she did that. She so totally believed in what I was doing. She had such trust in me. And she said, I don't understand it, but I believe you, and I'm going to do all the families. So she did all her family lines. And I do remember this as if it was yesterday. 2 weeks after, her brother finished the whole family healing program. There was a knock on the door. It was even actually outside business hours. I opened the door, and she was there, standing at the door. I was like, wow. 4 weeks later, she was driving herself to the center. 8 weeks later, she was giving treatments to other people. I taught her how to give treatments. Now, let me tell you why I'm telling you this story. The common ingredient, that's why I've chosen these 2 stories to tell. I've got hundreds of others that I could tell you, but there's a reason I chose these 2. One, because they were the most dramatic changes that I have ever seen. 2, there was one common ingredient between those 2 stories. Can you guess what the common ingredient was? That helps, but that wasn't the common one. The common ingredient was love. Deep, deep love. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. The guy with the bipolar illness, you know what he said to me? He said, I'm not doing this for myself. I'm doing this for my children. I don't want my children to go through what I'm going through. The love he had for his children was so deeply touching. And when you have such deep love, essentially what you are touching is the very source of life. And it's that source of life that's doing the healing, not us. We are just intermediary. We just have learned the method on how to use key energy to help people's physical, emotional, and spiritual conditions. But I'm not doing it. I know that fully well. There's something else which is doing it. But if you are able to make that connection, then healing will happen. And the second one, same thing. The love of the father for her daughter, for his daughter, even though he did not believe a word that I said, but the love, the deep love I felt in that family. In fact, as soon as I walked in the house, you could feel. In fact, it was her brother who came to me at first. I was doing a healing expo in Melbourne, and he came to me in tears. He was actually crying and saying, my sister is dying. Can you help her? The love of the brother, the love of the father. And I used a little bit of science here to kind of start off with the whole thing, but I need to finish like this. If you are going to do this family healing, it's only going to be done through your heart, not through your head. I can spend the next 2 or 3 hours here giving you more science, telling you more stories, and that's not going to make any difference. The only reason you can do this is through your heart. To having a very deep compassion and a very deep love for our parents, our grandparents, our great-grandparents. One thing I do remember about my parents was this. They worked day and night to support us. We were 6 children, day and night, working non-stop, and put all of us through university. How can I repay that? So the family healing can really only be done with the understanding that life is eternal. We are going to be carrying this information from our ancestors' life into eternity. If it's not a good one, one thing I always said, I said like this many years ago, I said, you know what? I wouldn't like to live for eternity with myself. I need to do something about it. One of the things that we know about the spirit world, and this again doesn't come from me, this comes from people who know a lot more than me. And I'm going to suggest you a book for you to read about it. One thing we do know is the different levels in the spirit world. When we talk about these levels, going from the lowest to the highest, or the darkest to the brightest. Well, essentially what this means is, I'm going to give a very dramatic example. Let's think about Hitler. Do you think that once Hitler died, he became a saint? When people who have committed the worst crimes against humanity, and I'm not talking about just being nasty to your next door neighbor, I'm talking about committing the worst crimes against humanity, you go to the lowest and the darkest place. Because that is what you have made yourself to be. We create, you know what eternity is? Eternity is the life that we are creating right now. The life you create now is the eternal life. Now you take somebody like Jesus, Buddha, where do you think they're going to go? Our ancestors are somewhere there. We're going to have some that might be here, we're going to have some that are there, we're going to have some that are there. But now there's you here, still alive, still in this world. You were made by, let's say, a father or a mother, it doesn't matter, who was carrying some very heavy history, some very stuff. And you're receiving that information throughout your life. In my case, this cancer gene, so let's assume I'm tuned to this cancer frequency. Disease is a frequency. DNA, everything is just a frequency. It depends what frequency you talk about, good frequency or bad frequency, but it's just frequency. So there I am connected with this frequency here. So the likelihood of this gene becoming active, yes, 85 to 90%. That's what they told me. Because I'm constantly receiving, I'm constantly tuned to that information. This information is going back and forth. So the likelihood of this cancer gene becoming active, 85 to 90%. Why? Because I'm carrying that information. Guess what happens if I change this information? Now I'm receiving this information, not that one. That is what the family healing is doing. With key energy, we change that information, we change that frequency. So instead of receiving this information, you're going to be receiving that information. And in turn, when you leave this world, rather than going here, you go there. I'll finish off by giving a quote by Carl Jung, who was one of my most favorite men in this world. Carl Jung said, he was being very humble, but he did say that. I have failed in my foremost task to open people's eyes to the fact that man has a soul. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marie. I think you probably